Welcome to an amazing panel discussion. I am so lucky to have an amazing crew here with me today. My name is Jason Medley, and I am the Chief People Officer for Codility. Today, we're going to be talking about employer branding strategies and really how to build a company that engineers really want to work for. It's no secret that out in the market today, it is chaos. It's crazy. Many countries are starting to come out of the pandemic. Hiring is up. And hiring the best talent is really, really difficult in kind of a different way than it really has ever been. And so because of this, it begs the question, how do you build great employer branding strategies? And I couldn't have a better panel with me here today. And before I have them introduce themselves, just a couple of housekeeping things. Please, if you want to ask any questions, don't be afraid to do that. Please pop them into the comments box. We want to hear from you. We're probably going to wait until towards the end to answer those questions. We promise we're going to give about 10 to 15 minutes to do that. I know that you're going to want to hear from these experts, and I'm sure that they're going to want to hear from you as well. So without further ado, would love to get started. And so for our panelists today, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. And what I'd like for you to do is, if you could really start and help us understand, who you are, what company you work for, what is your role. But then if you could go a little bit deeper and help us understand, how did you get involved in employer branding? And what does successful employer branding look like? What is the output of successful employer branding? Well, what are we trying to achieve in this? So with that, Lucy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So very nice to see you all. I mean, I cannot see you, but I'm very happy to be there. So my name is Lucy. I'm actually from France. I work at Trivago for about 6 years and a half now, and I lead the talent acquisition team there. So I actually did not start in HR at all. I started in marketing, and I moved there 3 years ago into HR, starting to take the employer branding team, and then slowly also taking the recruitment topics. So I ended up being in employer branding a bit by chance, I would say. So I was looking for a challenge where I could really understand the full marketing funnel. And I thought, actually, that's really interesting. If you're going into the talent piece, you can really oversee everything. And that's how I ended up in employer branding. So about Trivago, we are in the tech travel industry. So we are a accommodation meta search, if you will. And we are also at the moment, after the crisis, obviously trying to develop new products to really restart the travel industry. We are about 800 people, all based in Düsseldorf, Germany. And we are hiring about half of this basically is engineering. So we definitely know the difficulty and the struggles to hire tech people. Looking at what will be success for me for employer branding, I think ultimately the way we structure it is we're very close to recruitment. We have it in the same team. So for me, in the end, what my goal is really to make sure that we are able to hire the best talent for the company. So how you measure that, ideally, if one day you can have a higher quality metric that measure that, would be really the ideal goal to be able to measure our success.
Lucy, thank you so much. And I know that German market is tricky. We're trying to tackle that ourselves. So I'm really excited to learn from you today. Thank you and welcome. Tyler.
Hey, everyone. Tyler Yang here from Vancouver, Canada. I am a growth marketing manager at Shopify. Been here for just close to 6 years. And how I stumbled into employer brand was I actually started at Shopify in merchant success. So like nothing related to recruitment or employer brand. And then the recruiter that hired me, said, hey, I think you'd be, great in recruitment. I said, nope, you're crazy, not interested. And before I knew it, was in the interview process and we were talking and fell in love with, talent as a whole industry. And slowly and surely, as I was a recruiter, I started to miss marketing because that was, my background. And so on the side of my desk, started to run, Facebook ad experiments to try to attract, talent and different things like that. And, the business slowly started investing more and more into employer brand marketing and has now formed a fully functional team. Yeah, and I guess to answer your question, Jason, like what is the purpose of employer brand? To me, it's really like effectively communicating, your employer value proposition, but in a way that, comes across really clearly to candidates. So, you're attracting the right talent, right? And not just like the volume of talent. And I think when we started, it was just getting, people through the door. And now it's, how do we actually effectively say, okay, this is who we are. And, it might not be for everybody, but, attracting the right people to our company.
Great. Tyler, as you're speaking, I can't help but think like there's so many teams out there that are probably envious that you're in this role and that your organization has someone like you. I'm jealous. I want this full time on my team. So I'm so excited that you're here, and welcome as well. And certainly, last but certainly not least, Matthias, welcome.
Yes, welcome. Thanks for having me. Super happy to be here. So I am with the Mastercard, which is obviously a very large company, 20,000 employees, 200 plus locations worldwide. And I am part of the talent acquisition team that has about 100 people or so globally. And my team specifically is a smaller team within talent acquisition that focuses specifically on talent discovery and talent sourcing. So we're sort of sitting at the intersection of proactive direct sourcing and headhunting, essentially leveraging branding. As far as me getting started with branding, I've been in recruiting the majority of my career, and I became successful being a tech recruiter at first. And I always knew that when I was sort of leading, not with the job, but with something else, I had a lot more success, and I was able to drive engagement and was able to generate good conversations with potential candidates. So as I was moving away from the agency world more into the corporate world and the in-house world, I knew I needed to get a crash course in marketing of some sort. And I happened to come across a few videos by Gary Vaynerchuk, which I'm sure a lot of you know, who's a social media marketing expert in New York. And he left a really good impression with me, and I essentially sort of stole a line from him where he's talking about, how do you scale the unscalable? And that's really what we're trying to do. How can I hyper-personalize outreach to candidates? How do I brand our company in a way that they want to chat with us? And that really sort of got me, onto the path of branding and recruitment. In terms of the golden metric to us is, can we find more and better applicants? I think that's really what we're trying to achieve. Candidates and applicants that align with our business objectives and that can help us and that have fun working here. So that's really the golden metric that we're trying to look at very closely. There are lots of other things in the meantime, that sort of measuring conversion metrics and so on. But that's really the standard that we are measured by. How many good, diverse, quality candidates are we able to find and generate for the business that turn into hires?
Great. And thank you and welcome. We're going to kick it off here, but just reminding the panelists, this is a discussion. So if there's anything, if you want to jump in at any time, please feel free to do so. I know everyone wants to hear all of you a lot more than they want to hear me. So please feel free to do that. So Matthias, I'm going to throw the first question just right back at you here. We have people joining us today of many different sizes of organizations. There's recruiters, there's employer branding experts, there's VP and exec level. There's some people who are, who are being tasked with this for the first time. If, especially in your role, before you can really go out and start building sourcing strategies, you have to understand an employer branding strategy, right? And so if you're starting out in creating an employer branding strategy, like how do you do that? Where do you start? What do you do? Where do you gather the information? And how do you start to implement it?
Sure. Yeah, I think, I don't think there is a sort of a clear-cut template to follow. I think, a lot of the good branding experts I know in recruitment and a lot of the good recruiters sort of fell into the business kind of by chance, not really seeking out to be in that field. So I think there are a lot of different ways that can work. I think the Gary Vaynerchuk example is a good one in the sense that, once you realize that you're not selling jobs or positions or career opportunities, you're really selling a career destination, a home where people feel comfortable growing their careers. You have to start changing the narrative a little bit and make it more diverse and more interesting. And, so I feel like the first thing that you need to become is just become a really good marketeer, understand how marketing works. One of the first people that I hired on my team was actually somebody not from talent acquisition or recruitment, but somebody that really understands the marketing and outreach component piece, the branding piece. So I feel, again, there's not a template that I can sort of deliver. I think there are many, many ways how you can get there. But first and foremost, understand marketing, understand modern consumer behavior, and really think deep as far as what your company can offer besides career opportunities, and hopefully you can mesh all that together and come up with a start.
Matthias, I love that, and I love really sort of piping into the marketing side. I think a lot of times the function can be very siloed in some organizations, and the partnership with marketing is so crucial. And then hiring people with marketing backgrounds, I think, is a huge value add. So thanks for sharing that, Lucy. I know that you've recently stepped into this head of role, so I imagine this is even falling on your shoulders, even in much of a different way. But how do you sort of think about this?
Yeah, I mean, when I joined, I was coming, from marketing with my very data-driven background, and I was like arriving in the team where we had some metrics, but I was missing, my huge dashboard with all my data, and I was like, okay, I need to somehow build that. So I think my advice would be a little bit how to start is try to understand. You don't need to have a fancy dashboard, but try to understand the funnel a little bit, like what's happening, how does it start, like where do people hear about your brand, how do people apply to your job ads? Like, what do they react to what you're throwing out there? Like, what are the things that they are interested in your company? And I think if I would have one advice, looking at everything we've implemented, we measure a lot of things, but I think the one thing that I started, which really gave us a lot of results, was to actually interview all the people that joined. So all the people that joined our company, we interview them and we try to understand, okay, so what was really the thing that made you choose Trivago? What was the information that was the most helpful throughout the whole process? What was your feedback on the whole, experience that you had in your interviews and so on? And actually through these interviews, we really got so much information that we could really use to, adapt our strategy. So I think if you have a super small structure, or it doesn't really matter, I think that's a really good start. That will give you a lot of insights into, what you're doing well already and what you can build upon and what you need to improve drastically, maybe. Yeah.
Lucy, I love that idea. Do you, and just to be clear, do you actually sit down with everyone or do you survey them? How does that sort of work operationally?
Yeah, so at first we did that. We wanted to really understand it, but then of course it's not scalable. So now we do it through a survey, but we actually understood what we need to know, right? So that's a little bit more helpful. But just going back on that, one of the really great insight that I got from those surveys was that the tech blog actually was one of the most informative pieces that we were providing through the whole funnel. And as a non-tech person, I never really read the tech blog, and I never thought about this as being a big channel for us. And I found out that I think it was 9 engineers out of 10 mentioned that this was one of the convincing factors for them to join. And that was a mind-blowing information for me, and we really worked a lot on that afterwards. So I think there's really things that you don't think of. Sometimes you're too much into it, and so having that completely external views was really, really useful.
And I think there's so much pressure on talent acquisition teams to just perform, meet your headcount goal, that we're not spending. I would think we could all put our hands up and say we probably don't spend enough time actually learning and hearing from our candidates to better inform us, right? Some organizations are probably doing it better than others, but the pressure is real, and especially with a lot of recruiters who aren't always super analytical as well and are just focused on getting that candidate over the finish line, taking time to step back and really learn and listen from the candidates is huge. I love that. And Tyler, I'm really curious how you see this, right? Especially coming from a growth marketing mindset. How do you think about building out a strategy and an employer branding strategy and sort of going out to the market with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if someone's, starting from ground zero, like really taking some time, sitting down with the whole, talent team, or if there is an EB function, sitting with the team and really understanding like your positioning in the market, right? Like what is it that actually differentiates you from other employers? Is it your mission? Is it your product? Is it your tech stack? Is it, the ability to work with really, genius, clever engineers, right? And that's the selling point. So really understanding like how are you positioning yourself in the market, getting very, very clear on that. And then starting small, right? I think, as marketers, we think that we need to be on every channel at all times, with, constant messaging. But, the reality is talent teams are probably the last team to build out a marketing function, right? And so even if you choose, a singular channel, and maybe that's, LinkedIn, because it's kind of the gold standard, and you start, have a regular messaging go out on your organic page there, like it's a great place to start. And if you don't have a coordinator to even do that, maybe start with like employee advocacy, right? Like leverage the voices of like the employees in your organization, share that you are hiring, right? And really get everybody on board to be those employer brand advocates, as opposed to, having to build out a team right from the get-go.
I love that. And Tyler, I'm coming right back at you with the next question here, because you opened the gateway a little bit. Not every company is like a SpaceX, literally building a rocket, and going to Mars or the moon, right? And so, what are the different channels within employer branding that folks can look at? What do you specifically look at? What are the channels that you're sort of measuring and executing through, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for the most part, it's pretty similar to, if you had a product-based business, and we can use all the social channels out there. So depending on, which market you're trying to attract to, definitely take some time, do some research in terms of like what social platforms, are the most dominant, because I think, especially in North America, we assume, the Facebooks, the Instagrams of the world are the dominant players. But, you go to Japan and, Line, for example, is like one of the number one social platforms, right? And so ensuring that your advertising is going through the right platforms in order to like speak to that audience is really key. Personally at Shopify, we use like a multitude of them, and we're continuing to scale it up. And so, as I mentioned, like we started with LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, with both organic content and then paid content as well. One of the pieces that I lean heavily into is also our CRM. So it integrates with our applicant tracking system. And so we really, through all our marketing campaigns, if, folks are a little bit more passive, right? Like they're not actually convinced on a career at Shopify, we'll push them into this CRM and nurture that relationship with them, right? And it's really having multiple touch points where we can sell our employer value proposition to them, and really nurture that relationship over time, as opposed to assuming that if someone sees an ad that says apply now, they're going to be like, yeah, I'm gung-ho, like I'm going to apply right away. It's honestly like, how can you reach candidates in as many different places as possible, have as many different impressions, but as well, looking at technologies or channels where you can nurture that relationship. So whether that's email marketing, like I just described, or, building a talent community on a LinkedIn group or anything like that.
Got you. Out of curiosity, which CRM do you use?
We use integrates with Smart Recruiters, which is what we're using.
Got you. Awesome. Lucy, how do you, what channels do you think about? And then how do you measure success in those channels?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm not going to add more on what Tyler said. I think on all the social media, definitely we're using all of it. I think very strongly LinkedIn has taken a huge place in all of this. We we use it a bit more for also corporate information, right? So it's more of a balance. I think when we use other social media, we're looking more of a more behind the scene, a bit more casual relationship. We have channels like we call Life at Trivago. So we are more on that kind of things. Then I think the job ad, even though it's not necessarily a channel per se, it's still like very likely to be one of the first touch point that you would have as a candidate, right? With the brand, with the employer brand. So I think that is actually a piece that is often overlooked. I think there's a lot of potential there that can still be, used and improved. So I think what we measure then looking at all of this is really the volume of application. That's the first thing. So how attractive are we, right? Then looking at a little bit more down the funnel, like how helpful is the information that we're putting out there, right? So kind of that is one thing. And the other thing is also the whole experience, the whole candidate experience. So there we measure a bit like candidate satisfaction with surveys, for example. That's one other thing in parallel with, how our recruitment metrics are moving. And then in the end, it's a little bit, looking at offer rejection. It's another thing, for example, you can look at, right, a bit down the funnel again. Mm-hmm. And overall, I would say the hiring manager satisfaction is another piece. So trying to have always this kind of 360 view a little bit from the candidate, from the hiring teams, and then in general from our company's attractiveness, if I can say. It's really this three sides that we try to measure in parallel, and hopefully they all move in the same direction. So, yeah.
No, thank you for that. And I'm wondering, out of the three of you, do any of you mind sharing what's your number one source of hire? What channel do the most candidates that you hire tend to go down?
I think it's nothing surprising. I mean, for us, it's, I think, still coming from our company pages. Mm-hmm. How much is coming from other channels before, it's very hard to say. But I think then if you look at the other channels, LinkedIn is definitely having a big share of that. Yeah.
Got you. Cool. All right. Well, Matthias, I want to throw this next question at you, and we kind of want to zone in a little bit here on engineering, specifically with this topic. And I see that some questions are starting to come in. I promise you, we're going to get to those questions. But what are you seeing, right? I know you're leading up the sourcing team. What are you seeing in the biggest, challenges in hiring engineers today? And what are you doing to address those challenges?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, obviously all of us here on the call and everybody that is listening is competing for hard to find talent. I think in Mastercard's case specifically, I think the unique challenge that we have is that although we are a really well-known brand and a very respected brand, we're actually relatively quote-unquote unknown as sort of a pure tech company. So one of the things that we are really thoughtful and mindful about is how can we approach engineers and open a conversation about them actually looking at Mastercard as a viable career destination for engineers. And that is, there's a good amount of education taking place for that. And we really, we're sort of kind of leading with just explaining what else is there to Mastercard. When I first heard of Mastercard, I thought it's a credit card company, and it surely is. There are a lot of credit card aspects to Mastercard, but there's a slew of additional technologies and an array of additional technologies that Mastercard is developing, including cybersecurity, lots of loyalty programs, a lot of big data and AI initiatives, and just sort of telling engineers that there's more to Mastercard than they may think is sort of the number one step. And then the second thing is, I always found engineers to be very creative and just excellent problem solvers. And I feel in order for you to attract the best engineers, you have to have problems. And that sounds negative, but that's really what you need to have. Big problems that you're trying to solve, either for your customers or internally or both. And we do that at Mastercard at scale. And that is really something that we're trying to advertise and really evangelize with the direct outreaches that we do to potential candidates, and that's sort of our hope that we're trying to deploy, and it has worked quite well. Coupling those larger initiatives that people are not familiar with we're solving huge, big problems, and we'd love to help with that.
Matthias, thanks for sharing that, because I think we have, a lot of companies here today where we all now know that every company is a tech company, right? But that always hasn't been associated with their brands. And so, through candidate interviews, like Lucy pitched earlier, we start to get an understanding of how people, see our brand and what they think about us, and how we need to overcome that. I love that. Lucy, what about you? I mean, what are the challenges that you're seeing? You're very much isolated in one country, I believe you mentioned, where you're hiring most of your engineers. What are the challenges that you're sort of seeing, and how are you really combating that?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, right? Germany is a very tough market when you look when it comes to engineering. So just to give you a bit of an idea, when you look at Berlin at the moment, we have, I think it's 18,000 software engineers in the market, and there is 4,000 positions open. So there's really a massive pressure on the market, and I think it's very difficult to differentiate yourself, right? I think one other thing is really what Matthias said. I completely agree with that. It's very hard actually to tie your company. I mean, Trivago, people think of travel, people don't think of tech, and that was very much a challenge to bring that as well. So that's definitely one thought, to really manage to explain what is your product, what is the scale of your product, also from a technical perspective, and how that is interesting. And then I would say, I mean, hopefully you can build on really like what you have as a strength internally. So what is your value proposition, right? And you need to think about whether that actually matches what talents are looking for today. And I think if you realize that it is not, you need to make some adjustments. So that's a little bit of a process, I would say. For us, one aspect that was crucial linked to that was really the learning culture of engineering. So I think there's a very strong culture, like I mentioned with the tech blog, of really learning from each other, sharing expertise. And that was something that we had in the company that we really needed to show more outside as well. So that would be one aspect that we added a bit to our value proposition.
Got you. And thank you for sharing that, because it leads me into the next conversation. And I really want all three of you in one area or another to answer this. But, what do you believe is most important to engineers today, right? So we're coming out of this pandemic in many of our countries. Some countries are still hit pretty hard. But what do engineers care about? Right? Like what is selling engineers today? What is working for you in your employer branding strategies? What are you doing to get their attention? Like, what is the hook? What is the thing that that they want to hear? Matthias, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So, a couple of things. I think, the problem solving piece, I think, as I mentioned, I think is important to emphasize. The second thing is just, sort of cultivating, an openness in a culture that allows engineers to take thoughtful risks. At Mastercard, building solutions, that really mean you have an opportunity to affect how people partake in the digital economy. A lot of people are excluded from that, and Mastercard is building solutions that allows people, even without a bank account, to essentially take part in the digital economy, which is really exciting in sort of a large scale mission. And then lastly, I always think, and this is not Mastercard specific by any means, and I think this is just good sound, tech sourcing and recruiting and marketing, that all of us are really free agents in a way, as our engineers, and you're only as marketable as your most recent skill set in a way. So I feel look at an opportunity at Mastercard or elsewhere as a chance to learn something new. And if we have the opportunity to teach newcomers to our company a skill set that they don't know well yet or have a strong interest in, and that is something that they can take with them when they leave, I think it's a big value add. Clearly, we need to have good benefits and all the good things that companies offer. But adding to your background and giving you an opportunity to take risks and learn, I think it's a big thing that we're trying to emphasize.
I love sort of the upskilling piece, right? And I think the days of showing your ping pong tables and your 3 meals a day. We're probably not there anymore, right? That's probably not the thing that engineers are going to get really excited about. Tyler, I don't know if you're actually involved in creating the content that goes out or not, but how do you all sort of do this over at Shopify? What do you know about engineers, or what is the thing that sort of gets them hooked the most or gets them excited?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak universally, but definitely from what we've seen and the candidates we're trying to attract, it's those technical problems, right? Like ultimately, that's what's attracting like our engineers is also like the plethora of products that is the Shopify platform. There's financial products, inventory and shipping and fulfillment products, taxes. Like there's just so many different parts of the Shopify platform. And so, it does open up this kind of interesting conversation about, the tech stack that is required for each product. Mm-hmm. And our hiring process is funny in the sense where, we might be hiring for like a senior software developer, but we haven't actually chosen what, product they're going to be working on. So they come into our process, we interview them, they get to like meet different teams, and then we ultimately, based on their skills and experience, map them to the right product, right? And so it's something we haven't always done, but has worked out really, really well now. And so, yeah, a lot of our messaging that goes out externally, it's really about, speaking their language, right? Like showing them what they might be solving and working on at Shopify, not just talking about, hey, you're going to be an engineer, you get to work remotely, you get to, kind of these selling points, but more so like, hey, here's a bunch of code that, our developers just worked on for, one of our financial products. Have a look at it, see how we've actually executed and shipped this code. How does that make you feel? Do you have opinions on this, right? And so it gets that conversation going and gets people, already participating, even though they haven't even walked in the front door. And so, yeah, we found that to be really effective.
I love that. Actually connecting their impact, helping them understand exactly what they're going to be working on. I want to ask one more question before we jump into some of the questions that are coming through. We're getting quite a few, so I want to make sure we have enough time, and then we may bounce back to some other questions. But you did, Tyler, you did just bring this up, and I think I'm going to toss this over to Lucy. There's tons of webinars specifically on the topic of fully remote versus hybrid versus in office. And so, Lucy, how are you having to think about this as you're out there recruiting engineers and talent and building an employer branding strategy? How do you sort of address this when I think a lot of the world hasn't quite figured it out yet, or we're testing a little bit, I guess. How are you addressing this, and what are you seeing?
Yeah. So just to maybe give a heads up, we actually decided to move towards a hybrid setup, not a fully remote setup. There was a lot of discussion. Of course, there was one of the argument was like we will hire engineers that will help us tremendously to have this fully remote setup. I think what talents value most today is definitely the flexibility. So they want to be trusted to know when they work and where do they work from. But another point for us was also to consider our company culture, and I think a piece that was really crucial for us was to also somehow protect that to a certain extent. And we think that what we have as being in the office and collaborating is also very important. So what we've done is we've taken, again, a very data-driven approach. We made a survey last year. I mean, we had a very strong lockdown in Europe, way longer, I think, than in North America. And we were asking our employees, actually, what do you want? What would you prefer? And we were very surprised because we really assumed that all the engineers would say, I want fully remote work. And actually, pretty much everyone in the company said, actually, I want a 50-50 model. Mm-hmm. So that was a positive surprise for us in a way. And we really decided to build up on that and to go for a hybrid system where we have 2 days where you're supposed to come at the office with your team, work together, and really have that collaborative aspect and maybe more relationship building, right? And then maybe the rest of the week you prefer focusing yourself at home or wherever you want from. And that's really the idea that we build upon. So I think, again, find what fits your company. It's not everyone is moving remote. You have to move remote. Find what works for you best, and definitely the flexibility is key. So you need to make sure that you provide a trustful environment.
We've also found that at Codility that flexibility is key, and I actually see in different regions people prefer different things. So in the US, I think we have way more people who want to be remote first. They could care less in general if they ever go step into an office again. Way more sort of nomad travelers renting Sprinter vans, going all over the place. And then I think there's certain spots in Europe where it's definitely more of that hybrid model that they're sort of asking for. And so we've definitely taken that approach. Let's be hybrid. Let's meet the candidates where they are, and or the employees where they are. Okay, I'd love to get into some of these questions if the panel doesn't mind, because we do have some good questions coming in, and I want to make sure that we can answer some of these. So one of our first questions comes from Jarrett, and Jarrett says, do you feel an employer brand can be focused on a transitional moment in time, or would you recommend it be more static and focused on the long term? Does anyone want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can definitely jump in here. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think like you need to have kind of like your more long-term employer value proposition that can stay, consistent, and that messaging can be reiterated over and over. But excuse the leaf blower if you can hear it. Yeah, in terms of like kind of staying current, right? Like one of the things that we've done, if you check out like Shopify's LinkedIn pages, we started like engaging in meme culture, right? And so, really, it's something that's like very current, right? So if a meme is trending, we'll somehow like modify that meme and like make it Shopify, make a joke, poke fun at ourselves, do something, right? And so just, inserts ourselves in part of the conversation that's happening online already, keeps it fun, light. And sometimes you can still reiterate and insert parts of your employer value proposition in that kind of trending piece of content. But yeah, it's a great way to, keep things fresh and not stagnant of just constantly saying, hi, pick me, and saying like, this is why we're awesome, right? And so, yeah, keeping it as relatable and human as possible.
And employer branding is very much an active event in practice, right? And I'm very much curious on the top of this question, how and Matthias, Lucy, Tyler, any of you can answer this too. How do you designate headcount to employer branding? And I know we have organizations of different sizes here, but is it subparts of folks' roles? Do you have whole employer branding teams? I'd love just to hear a little bit about that, because we do have some folks here, again, who are different size companies, and this question comes up. It comes up quite a lot, actually.
Sure, I can start. Kind of to my earlier point, right, there are all sorts of different models that can work here. For Mastercard, the setup that works for us well right now is we actually have an extremely lean team. There's really only one person that is a fully dedicated employer branding person. And then we are essentially trying to leverage that fantastic work through as many channels as we can. Meaning we have employee ambassadors, we have obviously all of our recruiters. There are a lot of events going on, and then the talent sourcing team that I'm leading is leveraging that work as well. So I think you can start actually quite small. I don't think there's necessarily the need for a huge team, kind of depending on the strategy, I guess. But even one person or even a part-time person can get you quite far if you have the infrastructure to really magnify and leverage that content and the work that's done there.
Great. And leverage marketing, right? Like there's marketing professionals in your organization. If you can steal some of their time, if they'll sort of give that up. Okay, great. Want to read another question here, and this comes from Isabel. Thank you for the question, Isabel. How do you deal with the risk that employees share insider information on open tech blogs? Anyone want to address this one?
I guess, I'm the one who mentioned the tech blog. Yeah. That's definitely, we are a listed company, right? So that's definitely something that we had to also take into account. I think it's a lot of education first on what is actually information that you shouldn't be shared. But to be very honest, when I look at all the cases we had in the past of people writing articles, I cannot actually remember any example where it was a problem, because the information they share usually is not directly linked to business impact or things that could be really sensitive. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, of course, you should basically support them in the beginning when they start writing, and you should have a look at the article, proofread different things. But I think the risk is really, really minimal there.
Got you. So sort of having like a little bit of a moderator practice who's actively reviewing, and if something goes up that shouldn't, get it down ASAP. Okay. Like that. And Tyler, we've got a question directly to you, my friend, from Isabel. So is your recruitment marketing on social done in-house, or are you using an agency or tool to do it?
Yeah, it's all in-house. And like, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, it was, recruitment marketing, was just something I started on the side of my desk, and then, advocated with our director of talent to continue to scale. And today we're going to be a team of 12 people, which blows my mind. And so like what that actually looks like in practice is, we have a few growth marketers, we have a few brand marketers, we have a videographer, photographer, just to keep up with the scale of content that's being pushed out. And then we also have like an employer brand UX team. So that consists of 2 designers. So kind of think like your graphic designer, but also would work on like wireframes for like our careers page and different things like that. And then 1 front end developer to actually implement all of that, because the sheer amount of roles and different discipline pages that we have, they need to be constantly maintained. And it was really hard knocking on engineers' doors, constantly being like, hey, can you adjust this little piece of text for me? And so yeah, we brought that all in-house, but I know that's not a reality for every company. And so, start small. I would almost recommend like the first role that you hire, just be someone who can focus full time on like organic social, pick a few key channels and start there. And then maybe another person to scale up some more channels, and then look into the kind of paid side once, you have that buy-in from senior leaders to say, hey, okay, we're willing to invest, $10, $20, $50,000 a quarter into attracting talent or a smaller budget.
And Tyler, yell at me later, but for the audience, if you need help with what does a profile look like or a JD, I'm sure Tyler is open to connecting with you on LinkedIn and helping you out a little bit. I'm so sorry if your inbox becomes really full after this. So another question that we have, and any of you can feel free to answer this, but what has been the most impactful campaign geared towards technologist engineers that you've done, and why do you think it was so well received?
I can jump in here. There's this one that comes to mind from Shopify. And so kind of like how I was talking about earlier about like speaking developers, engineers language, right? And so we literally did exactly that. And so, Ruby or Rails at Shopify is like, one of our main technical languages. And so what we did when we announced at the beginning of the year that we were going to hire 2021 technical roles in 2021, we created this piece of content, and it was essentially code. And each line of code would basically say, quantity 2021 engineers, and then it would say like, the function was like to hire, right? And so we were literally creating a piece of code that was telling developers that we would be like hiring, right? And so if you were not a developer and you saw this, you'd be like, what the heck is this, right? But for that audience, they saw this and they were like, whoa, like what is this, right? And so that really resonated with that audience and worked really well. So yeah, that's one example.
I love that one. I've heard a few people do that before. I've never been brave enough to do it myself. But how do you, Tyler? And I assume you work very closely with an engineer or engineering team on that yourself, right?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Just switching gears just a little bit. Again, we have quite a few questions, so I want to try to get to as many of them as we can. And I believe this is probably from a recruiter. I think it's from Matthew. So it's, what are the best practices for demonstrating our company values as recruiters? So how do all of you bring up values or talk about values or measure against values in your process?
I can start if you like. I think I think it really falls on talent acquisition leadership to make sure that we're hiring recruiters and sources that have a really good high EQ and IQ, and that understand how to talk to communicate at a very transparent level, and not being too salesy and not being too pushy. Sort of having just a good understanding, being somebody that candidates want to engage with and have a conversation beyond just buzzwords and careers. So that has, I think that has what served us really well, and that's kind of the general approach that we're taking.
I love that. Does anyone else want to add thoughts to that?
I mean, totally +1 on Matthias. I think it's very important that, your behavior, your time that you take to respond, the feedback you're giving to candidates, all of this is a testimony of your values in the end of the day. So you have an opportunity at every interaction actually to just emphasize that.
Yeah, I like that. In your, you're exactly right. Your values is the agreement. It's how we get work done. It's how we celebrate. It's how we ship product. It's how we make decisions. It's how we overcome adversity. It's how we compete. And bringing the language of that back and being able to demonstrate that in your works and in the interactions that you have with candidates, it becomes more than just words on a page. And I think it's huge. I mean, I've seen companies do like testimonials against them as well. They hashtag against them. I think these are, it comes out in a very authentic way if your values are truly more than words on a page. And also making sure that the one thing that I would add to this is making sure that like everyone's bought into those values in the recruiting process and they understand it and they understand that the role that they play. Measuring against your values in the interview process. Some organizations have sort of like a culture ad interview. Some interviewers, everyone is measuring certain aspects of the values. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But I think sending the signal early to candidates that values really matter and it's more than just words is really, really critical. And make sure your recruiters know what your values are. Like that's the first starting place. There's nothing more embarrassing when a recruiter doesn't know what the company's values are, right? Okay, next question. This is from Shirley. Thank you. What have you done to receive honest feedback from engineers? I've realized they're not the biggest fans of surveys. Ooh, this is a good one. Anyone have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I think the biggest thing, especially when I started to lean into, engineering, recruitment marketing specifically, I was like, these people are way smarter than me. They're geniuses. If I talk to them, I'm just going to, fumble even in a Slack conversation. But ultimately, I think, they really appreciate, just being treated as a human, right? Like not like, okay, can you do this for me? Fill out this survey, but like, let's actually have a human conversation. And, there's so many times I've gone into those conversations with engineers and just saying, I have no idea what you do. Can you explain that to me? And like, put it in layman's terms as much as possible, grade 5 English. And, I walk away from that conversation having learned not only what they do and having more context about, our product and tech stack, but as well understanding what matters to them, right? Like why they enjoy solving the problems that they do, how that plays into the context of the entire product or business. And yeah, you get so much more out of those conversations by just, I feel like having total humility and just asking for a coffee chat.
I love that. I like to bring engineers early into planning for anything. And I always kind of joke, and especially in my role as a chief people officer, I always say, if you want real honest feedback, go ask an engineer, because they'll give it to you. And I mean that seriously. Like, they're very good at going into the details at what makes one of the things that makes them very good at their jobs. And but just like any function and getting buy-in on anything, like going to them and treating them like a human, to Tyler's standpoint, and asking for their thoughts on something, especially if it impacts them, is really huge. Okay, next question from, I believe, Aju. Aju says, do you encourage hiring managers to be part of employer branding activities? If so, how? Lucy, do you have thoughts on this?
I mean, not only hiring manager, I think everyone in the company definitely has the opportunity to be involved there. But to answer the question more on recruitment, then I think for the hiring manager, I mean, I think it's very important to give them the information, the context, because there are people that are involved in recruitment all the time, and they understand the challenges, and they are more willing to help you. But they are the one that maybe hire once in a while, and they don't really realize the complexity of it. So I would also just invite you to have a conversation about the challenges that you're facing, the market, how it is going, and why it's important actually to work on employer branding for that specific job profile. And then it's really not only about them; it's also how they involve their team. So it's often, they would do the recruitment themselves, right? But they can really use their team there, and thinking of content to get, what to share. If I'm an engineer, what are the projects that we're working on? All of this content you can get from the teams, like a bigger team as a general. You don't have to take it from the hiring manager. So really trying to make an effort there and to involve the whole team, I think is my advice. Because in the end, it's a long-term work, and that will help them in the long run.
I like that. Recruiting is definitely not like all of us, right? It takes all of us to build the culture in the company that we want to do. Matthias, were you going to add something?
No, I agree 100%, right? I mean, if you have this amazing branding effort going on, but then the rest of the company is not aligned, or doesn't live it out, and doesn't embrace it, or it's not genuine, it's not going to help you, right? It might get you candidates in the door, but it won't land you hire. So, again, my advice would be keep it very narrow, very simple at first, but everybody has to get behind it, or should be behind it. It should be part of your DNA, and that will make everything a lot more natural and effective. Great.
Yeah. So answer here, don't be afraid to bring in as many people as possible. It takes everyone to really sort of make this successful. And then another question to you, Tyler, from Elizabeth. When you talked about passive candidates and pushing them to the CRM, what kind of touch points or content do you share with this candidate pool? Do you have any examples?
Yeah, definitely. So I primarily focus on like our R&D content, so like highly technical. And so, I'll share different things from, our engineering blog, right? So it might be like a performance update about, how our platform is like performing. It could be, a featured job. It could be, digging into our employer value proposition, what it's like to work at Shopify, how we work, synchronously, asynchronously. Sorry for the background.
I'm dealing with the same thing on my side. So between that and dogs, I get it. No worries. We can hear you fine.
So digging into your EVP and reinforcing that through pieces about your culture and how you work day to day. We've done like day in the life kind of series too, to just show like really what that actually looks like in practice. A day at Shopify as an engineer or as a data engineer. So really personalizing it to each candidate or discipline as much as possible.
Great. Thank you. So we're almost out of time here. And, I want to give each of you just sort of a final thought to share with our audience. We have a lot of great people in the audience today. And it can be a technology that you recommend using. It can be, you can triple down on something that's already been said. Anything that you would like to share around employer branding and creating this brand that engineers really want to work with or work for. Matthias, let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, this was a great discussion, and I think Tyler and Lucy have brought up a lot of really good points, and you, Jason, as well. I think again, it's such a fascinating field. I do feel that probably everybody on this call agrees that recruiting has changed, and that we are moving more and more into becoming marketeers and running very thoughtful campaigns that are often very sophisticated. My biggest advice would be just realize that, it's very easy to fall back into old pattern, especially when you have a huge rec load and you get crazy busy. And a lot of those good ideas can sort of go by the wayside. So I think having that sort of discipline and reeling yourself back in every so often, just sort of understanding what the mission is and what the long-term objective is really critical. And that will really make your employer branding efforts fly. So stay the course, stay committed to modern marketing and modern branding, and don't let the busyness of the day, let you sort of get sucked into old patterns.
I love that reminder. Lucy.
Sure. First of all, thank you again for the invitation. I think it was a very nice discussion today. I think if there's one advice that I would maybe give is not only talk to the new hires that you're making, but also talk a lot with your employees. They are a tremendous source of information, and they are themselves actually, they were your candidates at some point, and they have a lot of resources, a lot of ideas. And some of the session where I think we took the most from were always session where we just had a spontaneous brainstorming on, how do we attract this particular job profile we are struggling with, or how do we do this and this? And you'll be surprised by the ideas that can come. So just, be open and don't hesitate to just spontaneously create those opportunities internally.
Great. And Tyler?
Yeah, like two things to add here. I guess number one would just be first, try to build the muscle of experimentation in your organization, right? Just that willingness to try things. It might might fall flat on its face, but ultimately, as long as you're learning and trying new things, is so key. And then as I said, LinkedIn is the gold standard. Triple down on LinkedIn ads if you can. It's especially great if you really need volume and to ramp up quickly. There are other platforms that you can do paid on, of course, but for job seekers specifically, it's amazing, right? You can target job titles, skills. You can do for gender. It's it's so targeted that I feel it's highly underutilized by a lot of companies.
Amazing. Listen, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our panel. Really great conversation. As I'm looking over at the comments and the chat, a lot of people were sharing tools. They were asking questions. It was really engaging. We're going to summarize this up for the audience as much as possible and get this back out to all of you. I promise. A lot of great insights, and we're going to try to capture all of them. Specifically, there were some really good things around tools as well, and some platforms and things, and some was mentioned here on the panel as well. Again, thank you so much for showing up today, for giving us your full attention and allowing us to learn from you today, panel. So Lucy, Tyler, Matthias, thank you so much, and thank all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.